Okay, let me explain it for you in one word. My name is Liam, and I'm 28, and my girlfriend is Olivia, and she's 30. We have been together for 13 years. We go all the way back to high school. Then we were all kids doing the silly stuff teens do. But I was worse than stupid. I cheated on her. I know, that is one of the worst things you can do to someone you love. And I realized it then, and I still abide by it. It's something I'll begrudge for a lifetime. No excuses, just facts. That was more than 10 years ago. After that, we never parted, and I was so sure we had processed it. We had some downs and rises, as do all couples, but I felt we were able to handle it. Turns out I was wrong. Last year, things got tough. It was a rough period in our relationship, and Olivia was offered a job in another province. It was an opportunity of hers, and I could tell she was struggling with it. Then as well, the shatters in our relationship started to resemble splinters. She didn't know whether to accept the job, whether to stay, and later on, whether she wanted to remain with me at all. And that is when the truth emerged. Olivia told me she'd never quite healed from what I'd done all those years ago. For a decade, she carried that pain around while I walked in the door thinking we were through it. I'm not gonna lie, that knocked me over. To know that you harmed someone, but to feel that it's all gone, only to discover it isn't. That's a different kind of hurt. Olivia chose to stay, in town, and in the relationship. She'd like to sort things out now that everything is out there, she said. I appreciated that. I really did. But I'd be lying if I said everything reverted to normal. Actually, it seems as though things got complicated. I've tried to be tolerant and understanding, since it was me who lied to her. But it also makes me think that I have been stumbling around purgatory for the past 10 years. Here's where it gets tricky. We've been together for 13 years, and there is still no ring. I have always wanted to marry Olivia, but every time I mentioned it, wait was a reason. But at last she was willing to admit the reason. She didn't propose because of what I had done all those years earlier. I get it. I really do. In the opposite position, I have no idea what I would do. Meanwhile, I had been kicked in the teeth for 10 years in a row. She might have said she was still grieving. We might have gone to therapy, struggled through it together, or even split up, if that was what she wanted. But she stayed, and I stayed, and we just kept going on without ever healing. Now she's planning to get engaged next year. I am not even sure I believe her. Some part of me thinks she's saying it simply because I've been doing it so much lately. And that's me maybe, but it's like I've been tethered to the wire for 10 years. I love Olivia, I'd like to be with her, but also I'd want to feel like she wants to be with me. Not because it's easier or because we've been together so long that breaking up feels hard. That's where I'm going then. I feel stuck. I'm not blameless, I know. I know I caused pain. But I've also found myself paying for it, day in and day out, for the last decade. And I wonder now, where do we go from here? Do I hold out another year to what might never come? I'm hanging on and hoping she's gonna do it again? Or am I leaving the woman I have been with for more than 10 years? I am not sure anyone has been in the same position. If you have, let me know how it worked for you. Did you stay? Did you go? Which was better for you? I'll take it all because, for the moment, I don't know what to do. You can ask me anything if you need more information to understand it. I am simply trying to see whether I am clinging to something that is gone or whether there's any chance for us. Hope, and it would be the main reason I stayed for so long in hindsight. Just praying one day Olivia would find me the man I've been trying to be to her. Just pray all of our good times together were going to outweigh the one thing I did wrong. In high school, I was immature, rash, and selfish. But I grew up. I learned from it. I did whatever I could to be a better spouse. I stopped partying so much, began sharing my thoughts more, and gave her priority in everything that I did. That was it, I thought. I thought love was enough. But there is no such thing as that. Sometimes love doesn't mending the scars you inflict. Upon Olivia's admission that she had been carrying that pain for a decade, I was shocked and shamed. Surprise, I did not know. I really thought we were over it. Shame, for I realized I'd been blissfully unaware while she was quietly in pain. Why hadn't she told me? I wondered. I told her that one night, and I'll never forget her response. I felt like if I mentioned it, it would break the progress we were making, she said. I wanted to think I was done with it, but I wasn't. She said that like someone had punched me in the chest. Her eyes were ethereal. All those silent years she wouldn't expose to me. That night I promised her I would do anything to redeem herself, including therapy. We discussed it, and she said yes, it might be helpful. We hired a couples counselor and began meeting with her. Those sessions were the hardest conversations I've ever had. We had to rake the earth, clean up the dust, speak about what we had hidden for decades. I had to sit there and hear Olivia explain to me how she felt by what I did, how she doubted her own worth, how she could never be enough. It was ugly, but it was what I believed we needed to do if we were going to get ahead. But therapy is not a panacea. It's not a drug that fixes everything overnight. Some weeks we'd walk out of a session feeling like we were one step closer than before, and some weeks it was as if we had regressed. The most challenging part was to recognize that this was going to take a while. Healing does not happen overnight, and trust does not regenerate on its own. It takes time, and patience, and effort from both people. After a couple of months, I began to see the incremental improvement in our relationship. Olivia appeared more open. She began to communicate with me what she was feeling, raw. This wasn't always pleasant to hear, but I found it refreshing. I felt we were each really opening up to one another for the first time. Those adjustments made me hopeful, but hopeful on a flimsy thread that might snap at any second. There were still bad days. Those days when we came out of therapy feeling further away than ever. Days where the old arguments came up and the blame game emerged. Olivia would tell me how bad I was, and my dreaded guilt would lash out. I tried to be cool, quiet, and not resentful. But sometimes it seemed like no matter how far we'd come, we'd be one argument away from breaking down all over again. Then I began to see a pattern. It never arose except whenever Olivia's life was going sour. Then if work got too much or she got into an argument with someone in the family, it all went out the door. I guess that is normal. The trauma doesn't simply fade from consciousness. It persists, and it manifests in unpredictable ways. But that didn't make it any less hard to endure. I had to sometimes walk on eggshells, not saying the wrong thing, not causing her meltdown. At times, though, it was like the tide was beginning to lift. We started to dream again. We discussed buying a house. We even chose a neighborhood we both liked. For a time, it felt like we were building a future. One evening, I think Olivia showed me pictures of houses online. There was a twinkle in her eye, and I was like, hey, maybe we are going to do it. Those were moments like sun shining through clouds, small but gorgeous. Then there was the marriage talk. I had waited for her to come ready. I could not rush her after all we had been through. But when she told me she'd get engaged next year, something clicked. I wanted to believe her, I did. But I was so afraid I might just be misunderstanding her. She said it to keep me from reciting it. Call it intuition or paranoia, but it tore at me. I began to focus more on what she said, how she moved, her voice. I'd pop in little questions. What wedding do you want? And where do you see us 5 years from now? Her answers were always vague. We'll figure that out later. She'd laugh. I didn't want to think too hard about it, but skepticism did. One night, I told her exactly. Do you want to marry me? Or do you just tell me that because you're sure I'll like it? She froze. She stared at something different, and I was sure. I figured out before she had a word. She finally admitted. Yes, I want to get married to you, but I have to be sure it is the right time. I nodded, as if I knew, but my heart was breaking. The problem with love is that it's supposed to be an option, not a trade-off. When she wrote she needed to be sure, she was apparently still waiting for something better. Maybe I was wrong, maybe she needed a break. But at 13 years together, how much longer does she need? I buried it all deep down inside for a while. I was being paranoid, I proclaimed, imagining the worst. But then the skepticism began to gnaw at me. I came to interpret anything she did as a sign. If she was distant, I felt like she was making a judgment. She wasn't being enough sweet, I wondered. I was driving myself nuts over it. One night I couldn't contain it anymore. I explained to her everything. I told her I felt like she'd been beating me up for a decade. I told her I felt as if I were being dragged along. And I told her right there, do you see a future with me, or are you afraid to let me go? She didn't reply immediately. She just sat there, staring at the floor. When she finally said something, she replied, I do not know. To hear that was more painful than anything she'd ever said to me. I could handle anger. I could handle tears. But, I do not know, stabbed right through the heart. This whole time, I thought we were on something. I believed we were healing, maturing, forging a future together. And now she was telling me that she didn't even know if she wanted that future. It wasn't the same after that night. We still went to therapy, we still had good days, but now something wasn't quite right. It was like there was this invisible barrier between us. I tried to simplify it, but as I got closer, she would shoo me away. I began to feel as if I was the only one left fighting for us. It went over with my best friend, Ethan. He told me something that stayed with me. Liam, sometimes love is not enough, he said. The fact is, people don't always want to be the same, and you can't make that up without doing your part. I didn't want to believe him. I'd wanted to believe that love could break anything. But in my heart of hearts, he was correct. So I began to think about my future, not our future, my own. Olivia was in every one of my plans for the past 13 years. Everything I did was for the sake of us. For the first time, though, I began to say what I wanted, where I wanted to live, what a life I wanted. It was terrifying, and liberating at the same time. I'd never considered my own future, I discovered. I asked Olivia one day if she ever would go back to her hometown. It was a challenge, sort of. Yes, she still thought about us as a group. But no, it would indicate to me she was thinking of herself only. She said no. She had told me she was happy where we were now and didn't want to leave. That's when I knew. We weren't making a future together. We were creating two futures simultaneously, pretending it was the same thing. It was more painful than anything else for me to admit. It was no longer all about the game changing. It was that we had been leading two separate lives under the same roof. I had tried for years to prove myself worthy of forgiveness. But I had never thought to ask ourselves if we were even right for each other anymore. I wish I could say I made the choice then and there, but I didn't. And it took me weeks, months to accept it. I would wake up every day and say, "Is this the day I leave?" For a couple of days, the answer was yes. Other days, I told myself I should stay just a little longer. It was like being thrown into a hurricane and not knowing where to turn. Then it happened, a haphazard Tuesday. No skufli, no show. We were on the couch and watching some reality show she liked. I turned around to her and she was making a laugh on the screen. She looked happy, and that's when I realized I hadn't seen her so excited in a long time. Not with me, at least. She was happy because she was distracted, not because I'd done anything. It wasn't the kind of happiness you fund a life around. I didn't utter a word about it that night, but I knew deep down what I needed to do. And I had to let go, even if it hurt. Sometimes love is not enough. It was not an easy decision to depart. I debated it for days, teetering back and forth in my head. Once I felt like I was settled, I would witness Olivia do something that made me feel like I didn't know why I liked her the first place. She would be laughing at some dumb meme on her phone, or singing along in the kitchen as she made dinner. These little glimpses had made me question everything. How could I leave someone I loved? But love shouldn't feel like a fuck. It is meant to be a place of liberation, of dwelling. And that is no longer how I felt. I thought I was always trying to prove myself, always trying to get over things. Nobody deserves to live like that, not her, not me. The night I left, I lay on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for hours. Olivia was already asleep, breathing steady. I watched her for a few minutes, trying to rehearse all of her details. The way her hair twisted at the ends, the way her face was so still while sleeping. It hurt knowing I was about to leave all that behind, but it felt right. I packed a bag in the back, trying not to disturb her. I only brought some necessities, clothes, phone charger, a few personal belongings. I could come back for the rest later. The sadness poured over me when I opened the bag and zipped it. It was like leaving a person behind, a whole life. But I also knew that life was not mine anymore. I wrote a note on the kitchen table. It was short but honest. I told her that I loved her, but I also had to love myself. I told her I wished she could be happy somewhere other than me. It was spelled my name, and that was all. If I stayed too long, I would worry myself out and just open that bag. That was the only part, getting out of the door. Every step was more than the last. My heart was pounding, and for a moment I thought I'd go back inside. But I did not. I kept walking. I hopped into my car, put the gas on, and just drove. I had no plan, but I had to continue. The first night was rough. I checked into a free motel, fell on the stiff bed, and looked up at the ceiling. I thought about calling her. I thought about driving back. But I knew if I did, we would all end up in the same trap again. I said to myself, if you leave now, you never will. So I stayed put. I let myself cry that night, cry hard. Not only some tears, but the kind that shake your entire body. I had been keeping it inside so long that when it started, I couldn't stop. The following weeks were nothing. I stayed with friends, sleeping on couches and taking takeout. My best friend Ethan took me to his house for a few days, and we just talked about everything. He did not judge me. He just listened. You just need someone to lay there and break you for a while. Sometimes that's all you need. I had started searching for a new flat, anything smaller than my place. It was strange to be doing something special for me after all those us decisions. But it also felt good. Everything I packed, everything I signed, everything was like I was restoring a part of myself that had been lost. I got a studio downtown, decorative, but big windows brought in plenty of sunlight. I could breathe for the first time in years. Living on your own after 13 years was weird. Little things would catch me off guard. I'd walk into the supermarket and reach for the brand of cereal Olivia liked only to discover that I didn't need it anymore. I'd lie on the couch and feel the void next to me as though it were an individual. I missed her, of course I did. You do not marry someone for 13 years and then forget about them. But the less you could do it, the better. Therapy helped. I began going to see a counselor for myself, and I talked about everything. The guilt, the confusion, the loneliness. I told her how I'd been trying to get Olivia to forgive me for years, and she said something that made my day. "Have you forgiven yourself?" she asked. I didn't have a solution for her. I sat there and wondered. I knew that I had always tended so closely to Olivia's suffering that I had never allowed myself to recover. That's when I started treating myself with kindness. I dwelled on work, on pastimes, on finding old friends. I began hitting the gym again, not to get well, but because it was nice to be active, to sweat, to be tough. I went on hikes. I read books. I began cooking things more than simple meals. I felt like I was building up a life one day at a time. A few months after I moved away, Olivia texted me. It was as simple as, "Hey, hope you're fine." I looked at it and then responded, "Yes, I am. I hope you are too." Then we chatted a little more, not about us, but life. She'd been to therapy independently, she told me, and was now figuring it all out. I threw in the towel and said, I loved her. No anger, no culpability. Two souls who'd made something lovely and terrible, now on opposite sides of the chasm. I don't know where it is going. I might meet another day, maybe not. But for now I'm content to be alone. I'm making an effort to love myself again, which is something I ought to have done years ago. If you are reading this and you are in that exact place, I hope you know it's fine to get up and leave. You didn't get it right. You opted in yourself, which isn't self-serving. Sometimes love is not enough. But in some cases, only love of yourself can save you.